Next up, another keynote speaker. We have Walker Todd, and a little background about him. He's an attorney and an economic consultant in private practice in Chagrin Falls. Since 1998, has been a visiting research fellow and instructor for the American Institute for Economic Research. From 1985 until September of 1994, Mr. Todd was Assistant General Counsel and Research Officer at the Federal Reserve Bank of Cleveland. From 1988 through 2000, he was an adjunct faculty member of the Cleveland Marshall College of Law, Cleveland State University. He has published extensively on banking, central banking, and monetary topics, especially those related to international debt, the International Monetary Fund, and the regulation of the banking system and financial markets. And prior to joining the Federal Reserve Bank of Cleveland, Mr. Todd was an attorney in the legal department of the Federal Reserve Bank of New York from 1974 until 1985. Where he was an assistant counsel after 1980. His areas of specialization include the legal aspects of discount window and emerging lending, bankers' acceptances, letters of credit, and foreign exchange. Please welcome Walker Todd.
I'm glad to be here. This is getting to be an old routine with Bill Peirce and me. We have of late followed each other on the podium several times, I think, in the last few months. Well, Bill mentioned the book that I wrote for American Institute for Economic Research. It's called Progress in Property Rights, From the Greeks to Magna Carta and the Constitution. It's essentially a history of property rights from the beginning of time. And the book that we published is a simplified version of the teaching text we use in our summer program at AIER. There are no footnotes in this book, but the one that we have at AIER has about 200 pages of text and 100 pages of footnotes. So if you want copious annotation of all the classical sources on libertarian thought, I guess contact me at AIER and ask for the digital version of the property rights draft now that the formal text is out. I also need to correct one thing that's up on the screen. I realized just now, seeing this on the screen, that I updated my bio sketch last summer, but I switched email providers in the fall. So if you try to reach me by email, it's my full name, Walker F. Todd, no spaces or commas or dots, walkerftodd@gmail.com. Okay, phone number is the same. I thought I would follow up a little bit on the fiscal crisis, the emergency, where it came from, and how we could get out of it. Those are the main things that I've dealt with in the last 2 years. As I tell my friends, when the crisis erupted in the spring of '08, that's when Bear Stearns went down in March of 2008, I began to get calls from reporters in Washington and New York who had not called me in about 15 years. But they all remembered that I used to know something about emergency lending, lender of last resort theory for the economists among you. And I learned it the hard way. I was the discount window lawyer at both the Fed of New York and the Fed of Cleveland. As I used to put it, after 1974, there was no major banking crisis in the United States, no major bank failure in which I was not involved in one way or the other, peripherally, in the sense of giving advice, or directly, as in drafting legal documentations and presiding over the bank closing ceremony. So, been there, done that. It's also fair to say that when the crisis erupted in New York in the spring of 2008 with Bear Stearns, and with even more ferocity 6 months later in September, as in a single week, think of it, in a 2-week period, the government did the following. It nationalized Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. It presided over the closing, the bankruptcy of Lehman Brothers, big investment bank, having earlier, 6 months before, bailed out Bear Stearns, thereby sowing some confusion in the markets as to what it was that the Fed intended when confronting the failure of a large investment bank. 3 or 4 days later, the Fed and Treasury presided over the forced merger of Merrill Lynch into Bank of America. Merrill Lynch, the street corner brokerage that everyone grew up with. And the next day, American International Group, AIG, a large insurance company, the largest in the world, in fact, was forced into the edge of default, prevented from defaulting on its external obligations only because the Fed made enormous loans, later joined by the Treasury, to support AIG. And the consequence of that series of operations was that the Federal Reserve now owns nearly 80% of the stock of AIG. Okay? So picking up on the points Bill was making about where in the Constitution do you find powers like that, the same question can be asked about the Federal Reserve Act, 1913. That is, where do you find the power to make these large-scale emergency loans, especially for non-banks, and most of all with respect to both Bear Stearns and AIG, the Fed wound up creating off-balance sheet structures that they later brought back onto the balance sheet to hold bad assets and securities, stock issued by both Bear Stearns and AIG. But these off-balance sheet entities are chartered as separate corporations, I think under either New Jersey or Delaware law, and they have 10-year terms. Okay? Now let's think about a basic economic proposition for a moment. And this is the bedrock of everything I've ever written on lender last resort theory. The Federal Reserve is about money, monetary policy. What's money about? Well, it's both a unit of exchange and the store of value. Do you think of money as an object of investment? Or is it the means of investment? It's the means, I hope. The Fed is turning money into the object of investment. The Fed, through its emergency lending for the large non-banks, and in the Federal Reserve Act, the particular power is located, I think it's 12 U.S.C. Section 343. In the Federal Reserve Act, it's Section 13.3. Okay? This is a special power that was added in 1932 and amended once in 1991. It was not used after 1936, before the Bear Stearns rescue. What 13.3 provided was that in unusual and exigent circumstances, 5 governors of the Federal Reserve Board may declare an emergency and specify the term, the time limit, for which reserve banks may make extraordinary loans to individuals, partnerships, and corporations, non-banks, basically. And the original language said, but those loans have to be secured to the satisfaction of the Reserve Bank by collateral of the types elsewhere made eligible for discount in the Act.